The Chargers aren't playing with us. They say no to a December stadium vote, and they blame the city. Where do you get your electricity? If you get it from SDG&E, it'll cost you a lot. And a survey says some San Diego restaurants regularly steal money from their workers. I'm Eric Anderson, and the Roundtable starts now. Welcome to the Roundtable. I'm Eric Anderson, sitting in for Mark Sauer. And joining me today are Jay Paris, web editor for the 1090 AM Sports Radio. Welcome, Jay.
All right, thanks.
Jeff McDonald, watchdog reporter for the San Diego Union-Tribune. How are you, Jeff?
I'm well, thanks, Eric.
And Dean Culbreth, government reporter for the San Diego Daily Transcript. Nice to have you here as well, Dean.
Nice being here.
Let's begin with the latest scenes in the San Diego drama over a new football stadium. The city and the San Diego Chargers continue to step on each other's toes, and they throw elbows as they haggle over the football team's future here. San Diego officials are saying publicly it can be done, and the Chargers say it can't. Jay, catch us up. What happened this week?
America's finest city became America's feistiest city, if you will. These guys got 3 meetings in before the barbs came out, and he said, she said, if you will. It just seems like every time the city proposes something to try to move this project forward, the Chargers are putting up a roadblock. So if you go by actions and words, it doesn't seem the Chargers are really interested in whatever the San Diego's selling.
Well, let's get a little flavor, a little taste of what was going on this week. Let's listen to Mark Fabiani, who spent some time with us on KPBS Midday Edition earlier in the week.
The city believes that it can do a quickie EIR in a matter of a month or two of writing, and that will survive legal challenge. We believe, as do our outside lawyers, who we believe are the best experts in CEQA law in the country, we believe that is legally insufficient and will be struck down in court.
And Jan Goldsmith, on the city side of the equation, had this to say about what was going on.
I don't think we have a CEQA problem. We do have a Charger problem. CEQA is a smokescreen. If they've made a business decision that they want to be in Carson, build a stadium on a former dump, and that's their number one choice, and shack up with the Raiders, then they should say so.
So CEQA, a vote, what exactly is going on here? What are they talking about?
Shacking up with Raiders sounded pretty wild, too. It goes back to the California environmental law. And Mr. Goldsmith himself, wasn't that long ago, said it takes 12 to 18 months to formulate a plan. Now they're saying if we work around the clock, we can get it done by December 15th. He may be right and he may be wrong as well. And the Chargers, to give them credit, if you will, I mean, they're not sure that's on legal footing, and they don't want to wait around to see if that's proven first by the ballot box and then by the courts. It could be a couple years down the road when there's already 2 teams in L.A. So they're protecting their business interests. It just doesn't seem like there's any interest in doing business in San Diego.
And I sense that there's a sharpening of the rhetoric here on both sides of the fence.
Right, and hey, this is how San Diego rolls. I mean, remember, Petco Park was rebar sticking up out of the ground for 18 months. I mean, that thing was built, and then it was going to go away, and then it was built again. So, deals of this magnitude usually are reached at the 11th hour. We're getting pretty close to that because the NFL has been pretty adamant. They want a team next year in L.A., and they want a decision by January at the latest. So it's go time on both sides, and it still remains to be seen if there's enough time to get this thing done.
And Dean, you've covered this story a little bit as well. I mean, where do you see this posturing carrying us in terms of this debate?
Well, I think where it's carrying the Chargers is Los Angeles. I mean, I think the Chargers are really making it clear without saying it that they want to go to Los Angeles. Their fear, I think, is that if they say they want to go to Los Angeles, nobody's going to come to their games. That's what happened in Houston when Houston moved to Tennessee. It's what happened when Cleveland moved to Baltimore. Back in the 90s, those teams moved, and their attendance just plummeted. In Houston, you could be having a conversation on the field, and they would hear you in the stands because there were so few people there, and there was so little noise. So that is what the Chargers are afraid of. They don't want the fans to blame them, so they're pointing the finger at City Hall.
And it seems to me like we don't have, it's not guaranteed that the Chargers are going to get what they want in L.A. The Carson site isn't firmed up. There's another potential owner in the picture who wants to move his team from St. Louis. So there's a chance that, even after all of this public debate that's not the kindest, that they could still be here.
Yeah, that's really the worst scenario for the Spanos family, to be a lame duck team, or to be a team that's flirted with another city and comes back to a jilted lover and asking them to pay $100 for a ticket to go to a game. And let's be clear here, the Spanos family has to be very careful. They could go down as making one of the biggest business blunders in the history of the NFL. I mean, if they wanted to move to L.A., they had 20 years to do it. And they weren't able to do it, and now if two other teams beat them to the punch and they go back to their city who they've jilted, it's going to look like the Portland Trailblazers passing on Michael Jordan and taking Sam Bowie. I mean, they had that chance right there. They've let it slip through their fingers so far.
So we kind of heard about the city's position. We've heard about the Chargers. What about the NFL? Are they really driving the bus here?
Oh, they will try to squeeze every nickel out of any municipality they can, and that's really the deal. And you know this, Jeff. I mean, there's one thing about doing a fair deal, and then there's one thing about doing a deal with the NFL. They are no more interested in doing a fair deal than the man in the moon. They're going to squeeze every city and every location. They pit them against each other, and that's really why L.A. was so viable and so advantageous to the NFL for being empty for 2 decades. Anytime anybody wanted some public money, they would play the L.A. card. Be careful, we're going to move to L.A., and then the politicians would find that money.
It's funny because Fabiani was comparing us unfavorably to Oakland and St. Louis, saying, oh, well, why can't Faulkner be like the mayors of those cities? The NFL has gotten mad at the mayor of Oakland because she hasn't produced a plan like we're producing down here, because they haven't committed to putting any public money into it. It is, a lot about the money.
Oh, it sure is. And really, I commend the L.A. and really Southern California for being so tight with the public money. I mean, $600 million, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
If they get squeezed out of Los Angeles and have to stay in San Diego, what kind of damage are they doing long-term to their fan base here?
Well, I think it'd be substantial. And I think, too, they like to say they have 25% of their fan base up in L.A. County, Orange County. That base would be up there, and you're 75% people you've made mad, and you still don't have your stadium. That's why the Spanoses are they got to be real careful here, or they're going to be looking bad on a couple fronts.
What are the Plan B options here? I mean, what can they do? Obviously, if Carson, let's just talk about Carson just a sec. Carson is not a sure thing.
It's not a sure thing
because you're relying on money from another football franchise that may not end up moving there, and you're relying on a city that really doesn't look like they're in the best shape as well.
Right, exactly. But I think you got to look at the market, and they could play on the 405 freeway and still have the L.A. market 6 times as big. Also, please look that Goldman Sachs is backing them up there. Goldman Sachs backs the ones in Inglewood. Goldman Sachs isn't backing anything right here.
Okay. Other big sports news in town this week. We had a change at a major sports franchise, not the Chargers in this particular case, but a change that's kind of uncommon. Only the 3rd manager in the last 20 years now, a managerial change for the Padres. What happened?
Right, Bud Black, 8+ seasons. He was let go in favor of Pat Murphy, the team's AAA manager down in El Paso. I think there was such an overhaul with that roster this offseason. I think the expectations were way up there, maybe a little too high up. They were playing right around 500, which usually with the Padres is meant for a parade afterward because they've been under 500 4 straight years. But that wasn't enough for A.J. Preller, the new general manager. Buddy Black wasn't his hire. He brought in Murphy. He thought they needed a little more of an edge, a little more of a tough guy. Murphy will give him that. Let's see where it goes.
They started kind of by falling on their face.
Yeah, they went 0-3 out of the gate.
Week.
They won last night in Oakland and opened up a 3-game series with Arizona. I mean, there's still 100 games left. There's still a lot of baseball left, but they haven't been quite playing as been promised.
But why are the managers here in San Diego so sticky? How can they? Bruce Bochy here for a number of years, sub 500 record when he left.
Well, it beats being sub 500 in Cleveland. So a lot of people don't like to leave L.A. other than the Chargers, I guess.
So what's on the future? What's on the horizon for the Padres?
Well, they're going to see Pat Murphy, see how he does. I mean, he's never managed in the major league before. He's more of a college guy, minor league guy. If he lights the world on fire, they won't be able to chase him away. That being said, if they keep playing at this current level, they'll look for a new manager next year. I mean, A.J. Preller's made it very clear he's expecting a lot more than playing 500.
Certainly something to watch here in
Heck yeah.
San Diego. Now, have you taken a close look at your utility bill lately? Well, San Diego Union Tribune watchdog reporter Jeff McDonald has. In fact, he's looked at a lot of utility bills around the state, and he's found something that you probably wouldn't find on your own. Jeff, what did you dig up there?
Well, private for-profit utility, they tend to charge more for their product than the municipal utilities that serve the minority of California electric users. We looked at rates between the big three IOUs. Those are investor-owned utilities like SDG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, and Southern California Edison. They serve the majority of the state. But there are dozens of municipal utility districts, the biggest being in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, and the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and a lot of smaller ones. And across the board, the government-run utilities charge a lot less, sometimes as much as...
The government does a better job, is what you're saying.
Well, it depends how you define better, but they're certainly cheaper, which is interesting, yes. And, you know, according to the for-profit utilities, they have other regulations they have to follow that the munis don't have to adhere to. They have limits on where they can buy their power. They buy more renewables, which is more expensive. And so there are a lot of factors that they cite in charging more. The municipals are very proud of their lower rates, and they point out that there's no profit motive in what they deliver as a service, and therefore they're able to save their customers a lot of money.
Give us a sense of what the price range is.
We looked at 4 specific use categories: 200, 500, 1,000, and 2,000 kilowatt hours per month. And we did that mostly for convenience because an association of public power providers just did a survey in October looking at all of the municipals in Southern California and the large investor-owned utilities. We chose 500 kilowatt hours because it was the most typical to what a family uses across the state. In Sacramento, which was the cheapest, the family paid $58 for those 500 kilowatt hours. In San Diego, they paid double that, $116 for the same amount of power. So it's a big discrepancy.
And how do the utilities obviously have a chance to respond to questions about this? What do they have to say? Why is it more expensive at an investor-owned utility that is supposed to be regulated by the state of California?
Well, they are regulated, but of course the reason that we looked at this is because of the questions that have been called on about the Public Utilities Commission, which is under investigation for criminal corruption. The utilities say, as I said, they're under different requirements than the municipals. They can't buy coal-produced energy. They buy more renewables, which is generally more expensive. So they downplay the executive compensation, the for-profit, the guaranteed rate of return that they all earn in favor of these other and reliability. They say they have better infrastructure. They invest more in transmission, excuse me, and distribution than some of the municipals do, and that adds to the cost of the power. As I say, the municipals say, well, we're a public service. We don't have to charge as much. There's no profit built in. Their executives make sometimes a 10th or a 20th of what some of the major utilities make. So all of these factors contribute to the rates.
And aren't utilities, the investor-owned utilities, isn't the way that they're regulated sort of encourage them to build that additional infrastructure? Isn't there motivation there for them?
Well,
to spend
yes,
money on that?
It depends who you ask, of course. The utilities say that they're doing a bang-up job securing the infrastructure, making sure reliable energy is always available. That entails always investing in new transmission, new distribution, sometimes new generation, and then they buy electricity where they can as cheap as possible. So from their point of view, they're doing the best they can to keep rates low and ensure reliable service. The Commission... they're the ones, the Public Utilities Commission approves the applications for new power lines, and the utilities tend to get what they apply for, such as the Sunrise Power Link. A lot of critics didn't think that was needed, but it's a multi-billion-dollar project. Once it's approved, it gets put into the rate bases, and San Diego Gas and Electric is able to bill customers for 20 years and a guaranteed rate of return on that infrastructure improvement. So The consumer advocates say that the investor-owned utilities like to boost their infrastructure because it raises their rate base and guarantees them income for 20 years when they build a new project. The utilities say they're just being diligent about doing a good job providing electricity to us consumers.
Jeff, does the closing of San Onofre come into play here as far as?
Yes, it comes in. That's actually what got us looking very closely at the PUC and the utilities. The utilities have said they need to replace that power to ensure reliable service, of course. Some of the consumer activists I talked to say that it's a great opportunity to generate geothermal from Imperial County or other alternative sources that aren't typically relied on as much as they would like to see. Now, the Public Utilities Commission just approved a new gas-fired plant on the beach in Carlsbad, another multi-billion-dollar project that we'll all pay for over the next decades, when they could have invested more in geothermal, because the Imperial, that's a tiny municipal district, the Imperial Irrigation District over next door to us, they've been wanting to invest in geothermal and bring that in, but without commission and approval from the state system operator, they haven't been able to do that. So San Onofre has been a linchpin in deciding how energy policy going forward is going to be is being enforced, and a lot of the consumers see it as a great opportunity to invest more in renewables, and some of the utilities think we need to be building more gas-fired plants.
Now, there is also a change being proposed by SDG&E to the California Public Utilities Commission about how people get charged. They want to change the rate structure a little bit. What's going on there, and how will this affect the high prices?
What's going on there is after the 2000-2001 energy crisis, the Public Utilities Commission instituted a 4-tier system where the heaviest users, where you pay in increments and different rates for the more power you use, and the people that consume the most power, big business, industry, large manufacturers and whatnot, they pay the biggest rates. Under this new proposal, there would be either 2 or 3 tiers, fewer tiers, and they would still be different pricing depending on how much you use. The utilities say it's a good idea because it more fairly spreads the cost among users. The consumer advocate community says, wait a minute, what you're doing is imposing more costs on the low users and the people who can't necessarily afford it, and giving a break to the companies and wealthy people that use more energy. There's also this proposal to impose a monthly standard fee that would charge everybody, say, $10 a month, whether you use any power at all, and that's a hot-button issue for obvious reasons. So we'll see where it goes. They're supposed to be making a decision on a couple of different proposals later this month.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. Restaurant workers in San Diego are the focal point of a new pilot study that finds that wage theft is actually a pervasive problem at local eateries. Dean, you've looked into the report put together by the Center for Policy Initiatives. What's that issue about? What are they talking about here?
Well, what they're saying is that workers at these restaurants work a lot longer hours or different hours than they're being paid for. They might come in half an hour early to help set things up, but that's not reflected in their pay. They come in at 5:30 in the morning, they start getting paid at 6 when the customers start getting in. They're setting up tables and doing things, later in the afternoon. They might be cleaning up. They might be, washing dishes. Suddenly 2 o'clock arrives, the lunch traffic is over. They're about to go home, 2 o'clock, that's when their pay ends, but they've still got to do some cleanup work. So that's one thing. There is a question of whether they're taking the legally prescribed breaks, which are supposed to be 5 minutes per 5 minutes per hour, as well as half-hour breaks that you're supposed to take if you work any more than 5 hours. And what is alleged is that they're not taking those breaks and they're not getting the appropriate pay.
And how did this come about? Why was the Center on Policy Initiatives interested in this idea?
I think that in general that they are interested in this idea partly because there is some affiliation with labor and the group, and and when you're part of a union, of course, union roles would be no, you can't. You've got to take the right amount of breaks. You've got to take the right amount of time off. And that doesn't happen a lot of times. Whether you're in a restaurant or in an office or whatever. I mean, a lot of people don't, work longer than the hours that they're officially supposed to.
Okay. We talked earlier this week on our television program, Evening Edition, with Mr. Borland, who's with the Center for Policy Initiatives, and he explained what some of the problems were in kind of getting at this issue. Let's take a look.
Right now, we rely entirely on workers coming forward with complaints, and obviously, when they're coming forward with complaints, they're putting their jobs at risk of retaliation, and that makes it very difficult for people to come forward. So what we really need is enough resources that the Labor Commissioner's Office can go out and do proactive enforcement without waiting for employees to call them.
And that Peter Brunel of the Center for Policy Initiatives talking about the difficulty of getting into the issue. People worried about losing their jobs if they say anything. They kind of have to go out on a limb here to talk about the issue.
Whistleblower protection there, or there's
no, not really. I mean, theoretically there would be, but you don't want to get a reputation as somebody who challenges these rules. Right. So these the conversations that they had took place on the street, at bus stops, on the metro.
They were very clear when talking about the study in saying that it's not a scientific survey.
It's not a scientific study.
So they don't claim that it's representative of all of the industry workers because they relied on these one-on-one interviews.
But it's by no means an outlandish claim. They say 10 to 15% say this regularly happens to them, which sounds like a reasonable claim. They say that as many as 75% say that within the last year, it's happened to them at least once. And again, that sounds like it jives with what you would expect from reality.
What is it that restaurant owners propose to do to address this? I mean, clearly not everybody that responded to the survey is making this stuff up. They must have some remedy.
Right. Well, the California Restaurant Association says, hey, listen, we want to make sure that our people are complying with the law and everything. On the other hand, they say, if you're supposed to take a half-hour break at the middle of your shift, you're working a 5-hour shift, that half hour might be when all the customers are coming, and you as a worker, of course, you as a boss would want the workers out there, but they're saying, oh, well, you as a worker might want to be out there because you're making tips from these customers. So, they're portraying it as something good for the workers, and they might have a slight point, but of course, it's even better for the restaurant.
So show up early and work through your breaks? Is that
that's basically it.
Just
and work late, too. Yeah.
And at the same time, these guys are making often minimum wage. And of course, the California Restaurant Association, which is saying, oh, this is for the best of the workers, they're the large ones opposing raising the minimum wage.
Well, aren't there California labor laws that protect workers in these situations? Hasn't this been addressed?
But complaints need to be made. I mean, they've got a very limited number of investigators or whatever, so they rely on complaints, specific complaints from the public.
Well, talk to me about then, what does it say about the whole restaurant environment? Is it the service industry here in San Diego? Is this pervasive?
I would think it's probably pervasive. You've got a lot of workers who are just starting out, who are high schoolers, who are in college, and so they expect maybe not to be making this money. But a huge number of workers now in those industries are in their 30s and 40s, and they are supporting families, and they are not getting the compensation that you might expect to raise a family on.
And the environment is changing a little bit for restaurant workers now. We've got the new sick leave rules from the state of California. Yeah. Explain to me what's going on there.
What is going on right now is that you can earn sick leave up till 3 days. Starting on July 1st, you can earn up to 3 days of sick leave per year, depending on the hours you work and everything. And that will solve a problem. What the study found was that 75% of workers say that within the past year or so that they've come in at least once being sick, and some say that it regularly happens. You're a sick worker, and you're handing food to people. This is not this is a public safety issue.
Right.
Right, so it's good for the customer as well as good for the person. And what about the push for minimum wage? That's been very, very visible over the last year. That would also help people in these service industry jobs.
Absolutely. You know, and again, thanks partly to funding from the California Restaurant Association, they overturned the minimum wage requirement or raising the minimum wage in San Diego. We'll be voting on it in 2016, next year. So, you know, we'll see what happens. I imagine that will be a very intense fight.
You have trouble getting a table in a restaurant after you wrote this?
I haven't tried yet.
Okay.
And are you going to pay more for that?
Well, you know, I think one place where these rules are the worst are the restaurants you don't get a table at, you drive up to the window. And
Right.
So,
Dashboard dining.
yeah.
There you go. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I want to appreciate your time here today. It wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Jay Paris of 1090 AM Sports Radio, Jeff McDonald of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Dean Culbreth of the San Diego Daily Transcript. A reminder, all of the stories that we talked about today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Eric Anderson, sitting in for Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.